At 79, Charles Whitmore was a man surrounded by wealth, but starved of joy. He had lived a life marked by achievement and fortune, his name once synonymous with power in the world of business. Yet now, all that lingered was silence and shadows. His mansion, a sprawling estate just outside Savannah, Georgia, boasted polished marble floors, priceless paintings, and grand furniture imported from Europe. But despite its elegance, the house felt hollow, lifeless. There was no warmth in the echo of its halls, no laughter to breathe life into its rooms. Charles had lost his wife 10 years earlier. They had no children, no sons to carry on the family name, no daughters to share quiet breakfasts or call on holidays. His days had become a routine of solitude, with only the steady ticking of an old grandfather clock keeping him company, its rhythmic chime a cool reminder of time slipping away. He had built an empire from the ground up, made brilliant investments, and earned a fortune few could dream of. But now, none of it seemed to matter. The business partners who once toasted the deals with him had long drifted away, pulled into their own worlds of family and retirement. Even James, his devoted butler of over 3 decades, had retired just months ago, replaced by a rotating staff of indifferent workers who performed their duties with the efficiency of machines, but none of the heart. Every morning, Charles rose early, his day unfolding with mechanical precision. Breakfast was always the same: eggs, toast, coffee. He sat alone at the table, the morning paper in his hands, his eyes scanning the headlines without truly reading. By the second page, his interest faded. He would then wander the halls, hands behind his back, mind adrift in memories. He remembered the Christmases with his wife, her soft laughter echoing through the rooms, the elegant dinner parties, the subtle glances they once exchanged across candlelit tables. Those moments now felt like dreams, faint, far off, and just out of reach. There was only one part of his day that still held meaning: his afternoon visit to a small, nondescript cafe tucked between a florist and a used bookstore in the city. It wasn't fancy. The linoleum floors were worn and the furniture mismatched, but it smelled of fresh coffee and warm pastries, and there was always a gentle hum of life in the air. Charles always chose the table by the window. He'd sip his coffee slowly, watching life unfold outside, the laughter of young couples, parents wrangling energetic toddlers, teenagers with earbuds bobbing their heads to unheard beats. In those moments, he felt connected to something bigger, something real. But the feeling never lasted. The moment he stepped outside, the weight of his solitude wrapped around him again, like a heavy coat he could never quite shrug off. One rainy afternoon, Charles took his usual seat by the window, cupping the warm mug between his aging hands as the world hurried by under umbrellas. Just as he settled into his familiar silence, the door jingled and a small figure stepped in, catching his attention. A young girl, maybe 10, 11 at most, walked in, her frame thin and her oversized coat soaked from the downpour. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair slightly tangled, and her hands clutched a crumpled wad of bills and coins. She moved toward the counter with quiet determination. Charles leaned in, curious. The girl's voice was soft but clear as she ordered a small pizza, a hint of excitement lacing her words. The cashier tapped at the register, then gave her a gentle frown. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she said kindly. "You're a little short." The girl's face flushed pink. She looked down, counting and recounting the money with trembling fingers. I thought I had enough," she mumbled. "It's for my mom's birthday. She loves pizza. I wanted to surprise her." Something stirred in Charles, something buried deep. Empathy, recognition, a long-lost instinct to care. He stood without thinking and approached the counter. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out a bill and placed it quietly next to her scattered change. "I've got it," he said, smiling down at her. "Let me help." She looked up at him, wide-eyed, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. For a second, she couldn't speak. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, "Thank you, sir. Really, thank you." Charles waved a hand as if to brush away the gesture. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Lily," she replied, clutching the pizza box like it was something priceless. "It's nice to meet you, Lily," he said. "Is it really your mom's birthday?" She nodded, eyes brightening. "Yeah. She can't walk anymore. She stays home all day. I thought a pizza would make her happy. It's a favorite, but she hasn't had it in a really long time." The honesty in her words, the sweetness of her intent, it cracked something open in Charles Whitmore that had been sealed shut for years. There stood a little girl who had almost nothing, yet was willing to give everything she had just to bring a bit of joy to her mother. It stirred something deep inside Charles Whitmore, reminding him of a time long gone, when he still believed in the magic of small acts of kindness, before life had become a calculation of numbers, profits, and losses. "You're a very thoughtful daughter," he said with a warm smile. "Your mom's lucky to have you." Lily glanced down, slightly bashful. Her voice was quiet, but proud. "She always does so much for me, even when it's hard. I just wanted to do something nice for her birthday." A quiet warmth began to bloom in Charles's chest, gentle and unfamiliar, like a fire rekindled after years in the dark. Something about Lily, about the honesty in her eyes and the quiet strength in her words, made him want to stay connected. After a short pause, he found himself asking, "Do you and your mom live nearby?" Lily hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, just a few blocks from here." Charles surprised even himself with what he said next. "Would you mind if I walked you home? I'd love to meet the woman who raised such a kind young lady." She looked at him, uncertain, but something in his gentle expression seemed to put her at ease. With a shy nod, she agreed. Together, they stepped out into the light drizzle, Charles holding his umbrella out over them as they walked down the damp sidewalks. The city around them buzzed with the usual noise, honking cars, distant voices, the hiss of rain on pavement. But Charles barely noticed. He was listening. Lily talked as they walked, telling him about her mother. She'd been hurt in an accident years ago and struggled to move around much since. Lily, being the only child, had learned to manage things herself, cooking, errands, shopping. She spoke with a calm sense of duty, not bitterness. There was pride in her words. Love. Charles hung on to every sentence. With each step, he realized just how far removed he had become from this kind of genuine connection. Lily lived in circumstances that would seem unimaginable to someone like him, and yet she was full of life, of hope. She had so little, and yet gave so much. And here he was, a man who had spent decades surrounded by riches but was only now beginning to feel the faint stirrings of purpose. When they reached the modest brick apartment building, Lily paused at the entrance and looked up at him with soft gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thanks again, sir. My mom's going to be so happy." Charles gave her a kind smile. "I'm glad I could help, Lily. Maybe sometime I could stop by again and bring her another pizza." Lily's eyes lit up, though she quickly masked her excitement with a modest nod. "I think she'd really like that." Charles watched as she disappeared into the building, pizza box hugged tightly to her chest. Her small figure vanished into the dim hallway, but the light she had sparked in him remained. He stood there for a long moment, unmoving. Something inside him had shifted, subtle but undeniable. It was as if a window had opened inside him, letting in a breeze of something long forgotten. Compassion, belonging, meaning. As he finally turned to leave, Charles knew this wasn't the end. Something about Lily, about the purity of her heart and the kindness she had shown, had touched him in a way nothing had in years. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he wanted to find out. The next day, Charles was back at the café. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but as he sat by the window, his eyes scanned every face that walked through the door. Each time a child entered, his heart lifted slightly, only to fall again when it wasn't her. Just as he was about to give up and leave, the door chimed, and there she was. Lily, the same hopeful face, the same kind eyes. She spotted him immediately and smiled as she made her way over. "Hello, sir," she said, her voice still shy but warm. Charles's heart lifted at her presence. "Hello, Lily. I'm glad to see you again." They talked for a while, about school, about her day, about how she liked to draw pictures and make little handmade cards for her mother. Charles listened intently, smiling at her enthusiasm. Their conversation flowed easily, like old friends. After a while, Charles reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "For you and your mom," he said gently, "just a little something to help out." Lily looked at the envelope, hesitant, her brow furrowed with concern. "Thank you, sir, but I don't want to take too much. You already helped me yesterday." Charles's smile softened. "It's all right, Lily. I've got more than I could ever use. And it makes me happy knowing I can make life a little easier for you and your mom." She looked at him for a moment, then slowly took the envelope, holding it with both hands. "Thank you," she said quietly. As she turned to leave, Charles felt something bloom in his chest again, something like fulfillment. She had no idea just how much he had already given him in return. Over the following days, a new rhythm began to take shape, an unspoken routine between Charles and Lily. Charles began to find himself at the cafe each afternoon, always a few minutes early, always scanning the street through the rain-specked window. And like clockwork, Lily would appear, her face lighting up with a joy so genuine, it melted the years off his soul. They would sit together, sharing pastries and conversation. Lily talked about school, her dreams, her mother. She told Charles how her mom, despite everything, always found ways to make life feel normal, how she pushed through pain to keep going, for her. Charles listened, captivated. Each word Lily spoke added another layer to the picture of who she truly was, strong, kind, selfless. He learned that Lily's mother had once been a gifted dancer, graceful, passionate, until a car crash years ago changed everything. The accident had left her partially paralyzed, and since then, she'd taken on whatever small job she could do from home, while Lily stepped up without ever once calling it a burden. The more Charles learned, the more deeply he cared. His involvement, at first subtle, began to grow. He started finding quiet ways to help, paying for Lily's school supplies, arranging anonymous grocery deliveries, even slipping a few bills into her coat pocket when she wasn't looking. These acts weren't grand, but they filled his days with a kind of purpose he hadn't known in years. They weren't transactions, they were gifts. And with each one, Charles felt more alive. Their bond grew. Over time, he became like a grandfather figure to Lily, someone she could count on. And in return, she brought laughter back into his life. Lily began asking questions, too, about his life, his wife, the places he'd traveled. She listened with wide eyes and real interest, not because of his wealth, but because she cared. To her, he wasn't a rich old man. He was a friend. And to Charles, that meant everything. One afternoon, as they shared a slice of cake, Charles leaned back in his chair and asked, "Lily, have you thought about what you want to be when you grow up?" Her eyes lit up. "I want to be a nurse. Like the lady who helps my mom. She's always so kind. She makes her feel better. I want to help people, too." Charles felt a lump rise in his throat. He smiled, nodding slowly. "That's a beautiful dream, Lily. And you'd make a wonderful nurse." Those simple moments, their chats, their laughter, became the highlight of Charles's life. Each morning he awoke with anticipation, eager to hear her stories and watch her eyes sparkle when she spoke about the future. His mansion still echoed with silence, but inside him, something had changed. His heart felt lighter, fuller, like he'd been given a second chance at joy. Yet, even as his care for Lily grew, Charles made sure his help remained discreet. He didn't want to disrupt her or her mother's sense of independence. This wasn't about charity. It was about connection, about doing something good, not for recognition, but because it mattered. He wasn't giving away money. He was giving away pieces of his heart, and in return, receiving something money could never buy. But one afternoon, as Lily skipped out the door of the cafe, Charles caught himself watching her a little longer than usual. A thought crept in, uninvited. What if she stopped coming? The idea sat heavy in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he had come to rely on her smile, her stories. For the first time in years, someone had cracked open the fortress around his heart, and the thought of losing that terrified him. He shook the feeling away. No, he told himself. Don't waste a day worrying about tomorrow. He would cherish every moment while he had it. As the air grew colder and the first whispers of winter brushed through the trees, Charles decided to do something special. He found a rare, beautifully illustrated book about nursing and medicine, one designed for young readers, filled with color and inspiration. He wrapped it carefully, tied it with a ribbon, and arrived at the cafe early, the book tucked beside him like a secret. When Lily walked in and saw the package, her curiosity burst into a wide grin. She unwrapped it slowly, and the moment her eyes landed on the cover, She gasped. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," she cried, hugging the book to her chest. "This is the best gift I've ever gotten." Charles felt something stir inside him, a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly brought tears to his eyes. Her joy was contagious, pure, and it flooded him with a feeling he hadn't known in so long, being needed. Each day after that, he felt more certain Lily wasn't just a sweet girl he'd helped. She was part of his life now. Family, in a way that mattered more than blood. And while he never said it aloud, Charles knew the truth. She had rekindled something in him he thought was gone forever, a reason to wake up, a reason to smile, and a kind of love that softened every edge of his soul. But then, one bitterly cold afternoon, something felt off. He sat by the window, coffee in hand, eyes on the street. No Lily. He checked the clock. She was never late. Minutes turned to hours. Still, no sign of her. The next day, she didn't show either. Nor the next. The café, once a place of warmth and laughter, now felt hollow, haunted by her absence. He asked the staff if anyone had seen her. No one had. No one knew where she'd gone. Days passed. Concern gave way to a tight, gnawing fear. Lily, his Lily, was missing. And Charles Whitmore, the man who had once faced boardrooms and billion-dollar deals without blinking, now felt helpless. But he knew one thing for sure. He would find her. Charles began asking around the neighborhood, going door to door in quiet concern. Finally, an older woman on the third floor of a weathered apartment complex recognized Lily's name. She spoke in a soft, sympathetic voice. "She's in the hospital, the little one. She got real sick. It's serious." The words hit Charles like a punch to the chest. His face went pale. Panic, real, raw, and consuming, rose in him for the first time in years. Without wasting a moment, he rushed to the hospital. His heart pounded in his chest as he navigated the sterile hallways, the smell of antiseptic and the low hum of machines surrounding him like a fog of dread. There, in the corridor outside a patient room, sat Lily's mother. She looked exhausted, her face drawn, her skin pale, her hands folded tightly as though she were holding herself together with sheer will. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes were swollen from crying. "Are you Lily's friend?" she asked, her voice trembling. Charles nodded softly. "Yes, I met her at the cafe. She spoke about you so often. I came to see if there's anything I can do." She stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust this well-dressed stranger. Then her shoulders slumped, and the story poured out. Lily had fallen gravely ill. A severe infection had spread quickly, and while the doctors were doing all they could, she needed advanced treatment, care her mother simply couldn't afford. "I've tried everything," she said, her voice cracking, "but I have no one left to ask for help. I'm so scared of losing her." Charles felt a pain in his chest that wasn't just empathy, it was heartbreak. This child who had given so much, who had brought light into his world, was now fighting for her life, and her mother, brave and broken, could do nothing to save her. "I want to help," Charles said quietly, but firmly. "Please, let me cover the expenses. Lily deserved the best care they can give her." Lily's mother stared at him, stunned. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Why? Why would you do this? For us?" Charles hesitated, then realized it was time to tell the truth. "Because she changed my life," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Lily gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Hope, purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning." He explained everything. Their first meeting at the cafe, the pizza, the afternoon spent talking, and how her little girl had slowly filled the silent, hollow corners of his heart. He told her about the groceries, the school supplies, the quiet support, everything he had done behind the scenes. "She saved me," he said simply. "Now I want to help save her." Tears rolled down Lily's mother's cheeks as she reached for his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for loving my daughter like that." With Charles' support, Lily was transferred to a better hospital where she received round-the-clock care. Doctors tried new treatments, stronger medications, and more advanced therapies. Charles was there every day. He sat by her side as machines beeped softly around them. He held her tiny hand, brushed her hair back gently, and spoke to her in hushed tones, even when she couldn't respond. Sometimes he just sat in silence, watching her chest rise and fall, praying. Yes, praying. Charles Whitmore, once a man of numbers and logic, found himself whispering desperate prayers into the quiet. Let her live. Let her come back to me. Let her smile again. And slowly she did. Day by day, the color returned to her cheeks. Her breathing grew stronger. Her fever broke. And then, one morning, her eyelids fluttered open, and those big, familiar eyes looked up at him. "Mr. Whitmore," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steady. Tears sprang to his eyes. "I'm here," he said softly. "I've been here the whole time." Lily managed a faint smile. "You stayed?" "Of course I stayed, Lily," he whispered. "I always will." From the corner of the room, her mother watched silently. Then she stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Charles's shoulder. The gratitude in her eyes said what words never could. In that hospital room, something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, not charity. Family, forged not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the quiet, steadfast connection between a lonely man and a little girl who saw through the walls around his heart. As Lily's strength returned, so did Charles's sense of peace. She wasn't just someone he helped. She had become his family, a granddaughter in all but name, someone whose laughter gave him life, whose dreams gave him purpose, and whose recovery was now the brightest moment of his long, storied existence. And for the first time in decades, Charles Whitmore knew with certainty his life had meaning because of Lily. There was a kind of fulfillment in Lily's recovery that no amount of wealth could buy, a connection that no luxury could replicate. For Charles Whitmore, it wasn't just about helping a child. It was about reclaiming a part of himself he thought had died long ago. In Lily's strength and in her smile, he saw the possibility of redemption, a second chance, a reminder that life's greatest joy doesn't come from what we own, but from the lives we touch. Lily's recovery wasn't just a new chapter for her. It was a fresh beginning for Charles as well. Day by day, he looked forward to seeing her, listening to her dreams, sharing meals with her and her mother. The cold emptiness of his once grand mansion became a distant memory. In its place bloomed something richer, a simple, genuine, joy-filled life. He began to visit their home more often. He helped Lily with homework, played board games at their kitchen table, and celebrated the small, quiet moments that once would have gone unnoticed in the echoing halls of his estate. And though Lily's mother often thanked him with teary eyes, Charles would only smile. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be," he'd say. As months passed, he began to understand something he had missed for most of his life, that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or stocks. It's measured in the laughter of children, the comfort of shared meals, and the love that grows between people who choose to care. With that understanding, Charles made a decision. He sold the vast, lonely mansion he had once called home. In its place, he bought a modest little house just down the street from Lily and her mother. It wasn't grand. It wasn't opulent. But it was warm, lived in, alive. He filled it with books, photos, drawings Lily had made. The garden bloomed with color. And every morning, Charles woke up with a purpose, not driven by business or profit, but by love. In the afternoons, he and Lily would sit in the garden, dreaming aloud together. She spoke of becoming a nurse, of helping others the way she'd once been helped. And as Charles listened to her, something stirred inside him. He remembered his own childhood dreams, long buried beneath the weight of decades. But now, through Lily's innocence and hope, he felt a renewed sense of life. Though his health waned, and though the years behind him far outnumbered those ahead, Charles had never felt more alive. He had given much, but received even more. A family, a reason to smile, a sense of belonging. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light filled the room, Lily took his hand. "You know," she said softly, "you're the best friend I've ever had." Charles chuckled, his voice catching slightly as he squeezed her hand. "And you," he replied, "have given me the greatest gift anyone ever could, a reason to live each day with joy." In that moment, everything made sense. The years of isolation, the endless pursuit of success, the fortune he once thought defined him. None of it compared to this, to the love and laughter now wrapped around his life like a warm blanket. In the days that followed, their bond only grew deeper. And Charles took comfort in knowing that his legacy would not be made of buildings or businesses, but of kindness and love. He had learned, perhaps later than most, that real wealth lives in the hearts we touch, in the families we choose, and in the simple, powerful act of caring. And when Charles looked into Lily's eyes full of promise and light, he knew his life, once hollow and cold, had become something beautiful, a story of redemption, a story of friendship, a story of the quiet, unstoppable power of love. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of connection, kindness, and rediscovered purpose. This story reminds us that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest acts of compassion. Speech Balloon, has someone ever changed your life in an unexpected way? We'd love to hear your story in the comment below. If this tale touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Until next time, remember, real wealth is found not in what we keep, but in what we give.